I think of brain engineering as like, have you heard of neuroplasticity? Yeah, like doing new things and learning more and more, like never stop learning. It continues to build more neuroplasticity because your brain is somewhat malleable. It's like it could be shaped a little bit, and the more you learn, and like whatever read, and like I know like hand-eye coordination sports bring it out. Um, that that's what I think of when I think of brain engineering.
Yeah, that's most definitely like the general term. So most definitely what I do falls under that, right? Um, we need the fact that our brains can change and always growing, always learning. All that falls under neuroplasticity. And then I just help people with specific part of the neuroplasticity, right? Because there's so much, there's endless amounts you can learn, endless you can do. So specifically, I help people either with the growth mindset or with improving their three phases of thinking and their 28 thinking skills. That's like I guess a subcategory of neuroplasticity.
So how do you do it?
How we do it? We essentially,
Yeah, how do you do it? How do you are you allowed to tell us how you
yeah,
do it?
sure. I mean, I could explain it in general, and then we could go deeper on specific
Yeah,
aspects if
yeah.
you want. But essentially, we do specific exercises to work on specific parts of your brain because we there are three phases of thinking. We have input where we take in the information. Right now you're listening to this podcast, you're listening to this information and you're taking in the information. Okay? You walk into a messy room that you need to clean, you're taking in the information of what's this messy room that you need to clean. Then we have the second phase, it's called elaboration. This is where we process it. So you're listening to this and you're like saying, how does this relate to things I know? What is new? How does this apply to me? Right? Or in our cleaning room example, your brain starting to think like this goes there, the garbage goes in the garbage, etc. Then we have the third phase, the output. Output is where you tell the world what you do with that information. So after you finish listening to this podcast, what are you actually going to do? Or if you're cleaning the room, you actually
Mm,
cleaning and you picking up a piece of garbage and putting it in the garbage or reorganizing a shelf is the output. Okay, so those are the three phases of thinking: input, taking in the information; elaboration, processing it; and output, where we tell the world we know what we know. Within each one
mm,
of those phases, there is a set amount of thinking skills. These are foundational thinking skills. Now, naturally, we all have stronger thinking skills and weaker thinking skills, but those weaker ones make it challenging for
mm.
us to do what we want to do. So to answer your question, what I do
Yeah.
is when I work with clients is do specific brain exercises. They essentially look like fun sheets that work on these specific thinking skills to make it easier for them. Does that make sense?
You said you you have these working sheets that help with how they think, basically.
Yeah, it's like these fun sheets. Maybe it might be a little bit easier for me to give an example and then I could explain how these fun sheets work, how these brain
Yeah,
sheets work.
yeah.
And then I could also give you examples of how you can do it even if you don't work with me, like even if you don't have these exercises. Okay. So
Mhm.
Um, let's go back to this messy room for example, okay? If you walk into a room, have you ever walked into a messy room and it is so messy that your brain just goes out, you find yourself going out and closing the door instead of actually cleaning the room. Now, this is something that's like super common that I hear very often. Like people get
It's
overwhelmed.
like overwhelming.
Yeah, exactly. It's
Yeah.
that overwhelming. There's like way too much here. Like, I don't even know how to do this. Okay. And so what happens is your brain, why is it getting overwhelmed? It's coming from a specific thinking skill called clear perception. Actually, it's the very first thinking skill in our phase of input of taking in information. Clear perception is how we use our five senses to take in the information. So when you are looking at something, when you're hearing something, how is your brain taking it in a clear and organized way? So if you're looking in this room and there's laundry
Mhm.
and there's garbage and there's papers and there's pens and all those stuff, is your brain just like, it looks like a mess and a mush and it just like wants to go out? Or is it starting to like
Mhm.
list out the items, see the things, understand what happened here? Okay. If you get overwhelmed, that's a very clear
Mhm.
sign that it's coming out as a mush, because if it's coming in a mush, because if it was organized, you won't be so overwhelmed. You could just know what to do. So that is the weak
Yeah.
thinking skill of clear perception. So how I would improve it when I'm working with a client is we have these fun sheets. Essentially, they're full of dots. They have like a bunch of dots in it, and they're shapes. And you have to find those shapes within those dots, very specific shapes. It can't just like be anything. It has to look exactly like the model. There's quite a few like there's a few characters that like, you have to follow to be able to find these shapes. Now, people who struggle with this thinking skill of clear perception, when they look at those dots, they literally say it's overwhelming. Like right before I got on this call, I was just in session, and that was what he said. He was like, "Yeah, this page just looks way too overwhelming." Guess
Mhm.
that's clear perception. Okay. The same way that he's going to approach this paper is the same way that he's going to approach life. So when you see this paper and instead of getting overwhelmed,
Yeah.
but you take that moment to just like stop and think, what's going on here? What do I see? Training that brain, talking about neuroplasticity, right? Like you're making those neural connections in your brain. You're training your brain to, instead of getting overwhelmed, to collect the data in a clear and organized way and then figure out the rest of the
Mhm.
page. Then you can do that when you clean your room. Personally, what I like to do when I tell people who are just like listening to this, if you want to try it at home, is because we take in information through our five senses, whenever you're very overwhelmed and not sure what to do, go through your five senses and list out the information you're taking in through your five senses. So, what do you see? And list out a whole bunch of things you see. What do you hear? And list out a whole bunch of things you hear.
Mhm.
All the five senses. And what happens is when you list them out, you literally take in the information. It slows your brain down and it helps you, instead of like seeing the whole thing is just a mess, but as clear, organized information of what's happening on in here. And then you can go ahead and do what you need to do.